Hello everyone, another Classic Movie Monday, and today we're going back. I am taking you on the road back to the West, and yes, this is going to be a Western movie, and yes, it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. Yes, this movie is fairly famous, I think, especially considering its theme, as well as the fact that it stars Clint Eastwood. And the reason why I think I put it as a classic is just because it is that old style kind of Western film that I think is just thoroughly recognized throughout the movie community, and it also has been really highly praised. And basically, I thought that that's more than classifies it, I guess, in my book as a classic movie. So without further ado, let me discuss a little bit of the plot, even though I'm probably not going to give too much away within this plot because I don't want to spoil it for you guys, because this is a very plot-driven movie. But basically what you have to know going into this film is basically it has to do with sort of a treasure type hunt, or money hunt, I guess you could say. And basically Clint Eastwood's character, also called Blondie, is a bounty hunter who is with this other character played by Eli Wallach, who is a bandit named Tuco. And basically what ends up happening is that these two characters come to know about some money that is buried somewhere, and basically they go out and try to find it. Now you have to realize that these characters, in particular these two, are very self-motivated, and so you're going to get characters that kind of maybe switch sides at one point, because there is another character that comes into play named Levon, or played by Levon Chief, and his name is Angel Eyes, and basically he's a really ruthless mercenary who also happens to know about this money and wants it for himself. So you got Clint Eastwood along with these other two characters who are basically kind of after the money and really are self-motivated characters. These characters are not the most, the most selfless of characters. However, the basic point that you have to get is that Clint Eastwood is the good, and Angel Eyes is the bad, and Tuco is the ugly. So basically I think what this film is kind of trying to suggest is sort of like what each character kind of represents. In particular, Tuco is kind of an interesting sort of character, because he has that like comedical side, but he's also very fierce and not so nicely spoken, or very friendly, you could say. He's more of the character who is extremely self-motivated, but he's fairly loud and comedical at the same time. So you get this really interesting character, even though I didn't really personally like him. I thought he was interesting. And I think that's really, a lot of the main focus is actually on the ugly. It's actually on his character. Even though Clint Eastwood and the other guy, Lee Van, still get a good amount of screen time, but it seems like the film tries to focus on Tuco's character, and he's comedical in the sense that he's really loudmouthed, and he kind of really speaks his mind, and sometimes that often gets them into trouble. You'll see this in the film. Like, he's just very loud and out there, and he tries to pretend to be like this kind of humble person at points, but he really deep down he really isn't like that. And in ways, this film was reminding me a little bit of Pirates of the Caribbean, because again, these characters are really extremely self-motivated, and But not to the point where, like, unlike the Pirates of the Caribbean sequels, where it's confusing. I don't think anybody will really be confused as to what's going on in this film for the most part. I think you can get fairly engaged in it. At times, though, it does move slow. Again, this was made in 1966, I believe, and yeah, it doesn't move at that regular modern day pace. It goes a little bit slow. But what also I wanted to talk about is not only Tuco's character, but to briefly address a little bit of Clint Eastwood's character. Basically, Clint Eastwood is kind of more reserved. So you see how Tuco is this loud-mouthed, self-centered, greedy, oafish character. And then you see Clint Eastwood, who's a little bit more reserved, doesn't try to be so loud-spoken, and is at times maybe a little bit more caring, and that's why he's kind of emphasized as, you know, the good. And then you see Angel Eyes, who's also just completely just bad, because all he does is he goes out and kills people, and he's not comedical at all like Tuco, and but he still has that sort of reserved kind of attitude like Clint Eastwood's character, but he's not good, and he doesn't really have compassion. So you kind of see how these characters sort of embody what the good is, what the bad is, and what the ugly is, so to speak. And they'll even say this, like in they'll literally pause the film at one point and then show you the good, and it'll be right by whoever character they're trying to associate with is good. In this case, being Clint Eastwood, and that's really how the film tries to kind of set up things for you. So it's very clearly explained, and even though it does emphasizes as Clint Eastwood as the good, he's not necessarily so good. Don't expect Clint Eastwood to be like this really heroic superhero type guy. He I don't think he is at all. He is very self-motivated too, and he kind of is not necessarily so good. But he does still have this kind of compassion towards other people, and you'll kind of see this a little bit. But for the most part, this film, I think, is trying to address a lot of these things through its plot. And as you see, as the plot moves forward, that you see how kind of there's like these points of double crossing, and you know, you have to understand that everybody is really not in this together so much. The characters, they're just there for the other person in order to get to that money. Similar to Pirates of the Caribbean, where you've had all these different people with different motivations who were maybe after the same thing, you know, like for example the Fountain of Youth. You know, it's that kind of a same thing, but it's narrowed down to the point where you can actually understand it, and that's what I find really interesting, and I find really what makes this film effective. Now, another thing that I wanted to briefly talk about this film is the atmosphere. The atmosphere in this film is really, I think, well done. It does give you a sense like you're in the Wild West, you're in the desert, you're in places where it's not as clean, you're in places where it's really dusty, and there's like a lack of water. Like at one point, Blondie and Tuco, they're in the desert, and literally, it literally feels like, you know, for some reason, I felt sort of internally that I was getting like more and more uncomfortable watching it, because I just look at that desert and I go, there's nothing there. They're just walking, or Tuco's riding the horse and Clint Eastwood's just walking, and you can just tell that that is just not fun at all. And at one point, Clint Eastwood's face kind of looks a little blistered, and they make it look fairly realistic. I was kind of surprised by that. I was thinking to myself, wow, they really did make him look like his skin was like sort of deformed just because of the heat, because it was so hot, because he had to walk, and you'll kind of understand why as you watch the film. But yeah, it's basically the plot. That's just how simple as it is, and I don't really want to give it so much away, because again, it's very plot driven. But another important thing to note is that during the time this film's taking place, it's taking place during the Civil War. So at points where Tuco and Blondie are kind of going through the desert, they do come across at certain points Civil War soldiers, in particular the Union, because the Union at this point in the war, I think, is winning. So you'll see how the Union takes a lot of Confederate soldiers captive, and you'll still see how the war is still kind of going on, and you kind of really get a sense of the misery of the people that Blondie and Tuco are basically going through. And it's kind of sad because you see these characters and all they want to really do is go out and find some money, when all these other people around them are dying for a purpose within the Civil War. And it's kind of it is kind of awkward to see this, and how they kind of are just so removed from understanding, and you do kind of get a sense though that I think that Clint Eastwood kind of understands, but from the other characters like Angel Eyes and Tuco, you don't really get a sense that they really care as to what's really going on. And you'll kind of get a little bit more of a sense of Tuco's character as the plot goes through, as they're going from point A to point B and C and so forth, because there is a lot of stops in order for them to get to where this particular treasure is buried. And then they have also Angel Eyes, who comes into the picture and follows them, and you will see how these characters are really in it for themselves, and it's not really about teaming up and doing things together. It's really about how can I use somebody in order to get what I want. It's that kind of a thing, and it's very. The things that I was getting were just kind of similar from Pirates of the Caribbean, at least the sequels. A more sense of people's self-motivations. But here it's played out to the point where I can understand them, and it's easy to follow, and I think that's why this film works so effectively. And I was left with a really satisfying ending. I personally liked the ending. I thought it was interesting, because it's kind of funny in a sense, and you kind of get the sense of Tuco and Blondie's relationship a bit. And kind of just how it works. It's a very dysfunctional relationship, but it's rather hilarious at times. This film can actually be a little bit funny. There is some comedic parts, in particular dealing with Tuco's character, who tries to be funny at times, and it works at points, and sometimes you think that the stuff he does is just so insane, but you can't help but kind of laugh at it and go, oh, Tuco, like, what? You're crazy, man. You're crazy. And he's just that very self-motivated, driven character, and you kind of see how these characters are, don't really have any other purpose but to move the plot forward, and in doing so, do it through their own self-motivations. But it really gives you a real depth and atmosphere, and it really tries to, I think, establish the three main characters and what they kind of represent. And I do feel invested, could certain things have been cut? Because again, this movie is kind of long. It's like 3 hours. Yeah, because it does still move at that, it still kind of moves at that Spartacus pace. You see all these landscapes and they just show it to you, and then there's at one point where there's like a draw, and this draw is like so long that I think people who are used to modern movies will have a difficulty in identifying with this particular film, because it does still move at that slow pace at times. But I think for the most part the characters are engaging. You want to know what really happens, and I think that's why this movie is just so good, is because of the plot and the characters themselves and how their motivations really move the plot forward. So if you're interested in like a Western, and a really old school Western, The Good, the Bad, the Ugly is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is the perfect, I think, place to start, really, because it really does encapsulate a little bit of what a Western feels like, and it tries to present you with characters that that could really work in a Western film. But I think that's really all I can say about it. I think it deserves the credit to be recognized as a classic Western, because it's just one of those films, and it's just been really well known by a lot of people. A lot of critics, a lot of people really praise this film for how it structures itself as a Western film, and yeah, it's rather enjoyable and engaging, but it does kind of move at that pace where sometimes certain things may be a little bit too more drawn out, at least for this kind of generation when it comes to movies. But if you can have a bit of patience, and if you like these kinds of, certain kinds of things that they put in that can be similar to like other movies that deal with self-motivation and how people kind of, double cross each other, and how they try to take the plot into one direction, then I'm sure you can really find yourself liking it. But if you don't really like self-motivated characters, and you don't particularly care for the old style of filmmaking, then this probably won't appeal to you. But if you're willing to be open to that idea of seeing an older Western, then this is a really perfect place to start. And I definitely consider it as a classic. And Clint Eastwood is rather young in this film. It was in '66, so I can assume that he is fairly young, and this was probably one of his beginning major roles. I could be wrong, but he just does a really great job, and so does Eli Wallach and Lee Van Cleef, and all the other side characters that they come across also do a decent job. And yeah, it's just one of those Western films that knows what it is and just does a good job of executing it. But I think that's really all I can say. Any questions, comments, concerns, more than happy to answer them. And until next time, bye-bye, everybody.